you should still know why it's in there. You should still know why it's in the product and the potentials of it if you're going to be putting it in your body. So let's kind of look at vitamin D in terms of what it does from a glucose standpoint. First of all, the very, very basics to make sure we're on the same page. One of the 24 micronutrients, it is obviously fat soluble. And if you look at a lot of the different dependencies that vitamin D is really dependent on, you have things like diet, sun exposure, disease, a lot of the cracks in the system that I'm going to say, at least that's what I like to call it, because a lot of people, believe it or not, it's not so much diet, it's not so much disease, even though those are two big considerations. A lot of it is sun exposure. Sun exposure is the big one. So if you look over here how we actually make vitamin D, we actually get cholesterol. Our body actually synthesizes its own vitamin D, and you get vitamin D. So how do you get that cholesterol? How do you get that process to turn from cholesterol into actual vitamin D in our system? You need sun exposure. A lot of people that live near the equator, especially near 37th parallels, are very good in vitamin D. Their bodies can metabolize. They can make vitamin D very, very well. So those people that are always outside, construction workers, even if you're just outside for, depending on where you live, the location, it's actually going to change day to day. Changes year-round, changes for a lot of different reasons. But if you're getting an adequate amount of sun exposure, you're probably going to be good on vitamin D. The problem is about 95% of the United States population is going to be deficient in vitamin D. We're all inside. We all are just under our own little, artificial lighting. We're sitting at our desks all day, myself included. So you need to make sure you're actually getting time outside for sun exposure. Talked a lot about this in another video, what else sun does for you. But for this purposes, I want to make sure that is very much understood. Again, I always like to put little, not teasers, but thing on the board for people if they really want me to go in depth. And that's more looking at vitamin D receptor. So from a receptor level, what's happening in terms of skeletal muscle tissue, what's happening with performance and hypertrophy. And a lot of this, whenever you look at vitamin D levels that are adequate, even though in the research there are not vitamin D receptors on muscle tissue, at least that they can find, even though it makes a lot of sense that it would be there. Which I kind of don't agree with, at least from the literature that I read. I do believe there are vitamin D receptors on muscle cells because there's receptors everywhere for certain things, different purposes. But either way, whenever you look at the research looking at hypertrophy and performance, whenever vitamin D levels are adequate, performance is optimal. You see performance increasing at a linear rate, again, within the confines of the studies. Same thing with hypertrophy. You don't see any kind of rate-limiting factors. Vitamin D is a rate-limiting factor when it comes to steps in performance enhancement and injury prevention and actual just muscle hypertrophy as a whole. Why is that? One of the biggest reasons what we're talking about here, insulin sensitivity, HbA1c, serum insulin levels. That's why vitamin D is going to be included in Matador, and that's why we're talking about it from a glucose disposal agent and a glucose side of things. If you look at a lot of the research, what do you see? A lot of the research is done in diabetics, two populations, diabetics and non-diabetics. That's a big thing to know. Whenever you see that vitamin D levels are low, you always see that insulin sensitivity is low. Whenever you see that vitamin D is low, you also see that serum insulin levels are not where they should be. You also see that HbA1c is not as controlled and not in the levels that it should be. So vitamin D levels are directly correlated with how well we process glucose, how well we manage glucose, what our body does with glucose. So that is actually across the board. And I put that down here because whether you look at the diabetic research or if you actually look at the non-diabetic research, that can range from some athletes and some of the studies that I read to some just normal average day general population people, no matter which category you're talking about, if your vitamin D levels are low, insulin sensitivity, HbA1c, everything is going to follow. So it makes sense that you're having poor glucose management if your vitamin D levels are not met. That's why this is actually in Matador. That's why vitamin D has a direct process and a direct interaction with glucose metabolism as a whole. And we could get into a lot of other things, but that's really what we're looking at. So vitamin D, get blood work, get your levels checked to see where you're at. You may need to supplement with more than this because there's not much vitamin D in Matador, but it is in there for this simple little reason of its interactions with glucose, metabolism, glucose as a whole. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Check out theprepcoach.com. Check out projectad.me, coupon code BFR25. See you guys next time.